In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a rich newcomer, Mr. Reginald Harrow, is found dead, poisoned, in a locked room, with a teacup bearing a mysterious lipstick smudge. Was it suicide or murder? Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed spinster, unravels a web of secrets, a hidden will, a vengeful housemaid, and a family hungry for fortune, as clues pile up. A vial in the shed, whispered debts, and a deadly herb. The shocking truth emerges. The quiet maid, Emily Clark, driven by her mother's tragic past, is the killer. With her knitting and cunning, Miss Marple sets a trap, exposing the crime and restoring peace to the village in a thrilling, satisfying end. Chapter 1. The newcomer's arrival. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft gold. Roses climbed the walls of neat cottages, and the air smelled of fresh grass and baking bread. It was a quiet place, where everyone knew everyone else, and secrets didn't stay secret for long. Miss Jane Marple sat in her favorite armchair by the window, her knitting needles clicking softly. Her sharp blue eyes watched the world outside, catching every detail: the postman's limp, the vicar's hurried steps, and now a shiny black car rolling up to Willow Manor. The manor had stood empty for months, its tall windows dark and its garden wild. But today, it buzzed with life. Men carried boxes from a van, and a tall figure in a fine suit stood on the lawn, giving orders. This was Mr. Reginald Harrow, the newcomer everyone was talking about. He was rich, that much was clear, with his polished shoes and fancy car. But why had he chosen St. Mary Mead? Miss Marple's fingers paused, her needles still. She didn't trust people who arrived without a story. New blood in the village, she murmured, her voice soft but sharp. She set her knitting down and adjusted her lace cap. We'll see what he's about. By noon, the village was alive with chatter. At the post office, Mrs. Price, the shopkeeper, leaned over the counter, her eyes wide. He's got money. That, Mr. Harrow, she told Mrs. Wicks, who clutched a loaf of bread. They say he made a fortune in London. Something about stocks or ships. But he's got no wife, no children. Odd, isn't it? Mrs. Wicks nodded, her lips tight. Odd, indeed. And that big house, all for one man. I don't like it. Too much space for secrets. Miss Marple heard this talk at the tea party that afternoon, held in the vicarage garden. The tables were covered with white cloths, and plates of scones and cucumber sandwiches sat neatly arranged. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, bustled about, pouring tea and smiling. But everyone's eyes kept drifting to Mr. Harrow, who stood near the rose bushes, talking to the vicar. He was tall, with graying hair and a sharp jaw, his suit crisp despite the warm day. His voice was smooth, like honey, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her small figure tucked into a wicker chair. She wore her usual gray skirt and cardigan, her white hair pinned neatly under her cap. To most, she looked like any old lady, fond of knitting and gossip. But her mind was a trap, catching every word, every glance. She noticed how Mr. Hands twitched when the vicar asked about his past. She saw the way his eyes flicked to the manor, as if checking for something or someone. He's charming, isn't he? Said Miss Hartnell, a loud woman with a red hat. She sat next to Miss Marple, fanning herself. But I don't trust charming men. They're always hiding something. Miss Marple smiled faintly. People often are, she said. But villages like ours have a way of finding things out. As the tea party went on, Mr. Harrow moved through the crowd, shaking hands and laughing. He spoke of fixing up Willow Manor, maybe hosting a dance. The younger women blushed at his words, and even old Mr. Bantry, the retired colonel, seemed impressed. But Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. She'd seen men like Harrow before, smooth talkers with shadows behind their smiles. Years ago, in St. Mary Mead, a man named Mr. Sanders had come with the same charm. He'd left with a stolen necklace and a broken heart. Miss Marple never forgot a lesson. Then came the moment that stuck with her. Mr. Harrow was speaking to Mrs. Clement, his voice low. I've come to settle old debts, he said, his eyes hard for a moment. Some things can't stay buried. Mrs. Clement laughed, thinking it a joke, but Miss Marple's ears caught the edge in his tone. Debts, What kind? Money, or something darker? She glanced at the manor, where a young woman stood on the steps, watching the party from a distance. This was Emily Clark, Mr. Harrow's housemaid, hired just days ago. She was small, with plain brown hair and a faded dress, her hands clasped tightly. To most, she was invisible, just a servant, but Miss Marple saw the way Emily's eyes followed Harrow. Not with admiration, but with something else, fear, maybe, or anger. Poor thing, said Miss Weatherby, sitting nearby. She was a kind woman, always quick to pity. That Emily Clark, working for a man like that. She's so quiet, barely speaks. I wonder what she thinks of him. Miss Marple tilted her head. Quiet ones often see the most, she said. They're the ones to watch. The party ended as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows over the village. Mr. Harrow drove back to the manor, and the guests scattered, their voices carrying gossip like leaves on the wind. Miss Marple walked home slowly, her stick tapping the path. Her mind was already turning, piecing together the day's clues. Harrow's twitchy hands, his talk of debts, Emily's watchful eyes. It was a puzzle, and she loved puzzles. At home, she settled by the fire, her knitting back in her hands. Her maid, Cherry, bustled in with a tray of tea and biscuits. Cherry was young, with bright eyes and a habit of talking too much. Did you see that, Mr. Harrow? She said, setting the tray down. All the village is mad about him. But I don't know, Miss Marple. He's got a look like he's running from something. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking, very observant. Cherry, people who run often bring their troubles with them. Cherry grinned. You'll figure him out, won't you? You always do. Miss Marple's smile was small, but sharp. I'll keep my eyes open, she said, and she meant it. St. Mary Mead might seem sleepy, but it had a way of stirring up secrets, and Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and clever mind, was always ready to find them. That night, as the village slept, Willow Manor stood dark against the sky. Inside, Mr. Harrow sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He stared at a locked drawer in his desk, his face tight. Across the hall, Emily Clark moved silently, polishing silver in the dim light. Her hands shook slightly, and her eyes darted to the study door. Whatever secrets Mr. Harrow had brought to St. Mary Mead, they weren't his alone. Miss Marple didn't sleep yet. She sat by her window, looking out at the manor's distant lights. Her mind traced patterns: Harrow's words, Emily's glance, the village's whispers. Something was coming, she knew. Something that would shake St. Mary Mead to its core. And when it did, she'd be ready. The next morning, the village woke to a scream. A gardener found Mr. Harrow dead in his study. A glass tipped over and a strange smell in the air. Poison, the doctor said. The police called it suicide. But Miss Marple, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, thought otherwise. She saw the teacup on the desk, out of place, and the faintest mark of lipstick on its rim. Suicide. No, this was murder, and the puzzle had just begun. Chapter 2. A death in the night. The morning air in St. Mary Mead was crisp, with a hint of dew still clinging to the grass. The village, usually calm, buzzed with shock. Word of Mr. Reginald Harrow's death spread like wildfire, from the post office to the butcher's shop. By the time Miss Jane Marple stepped out of her cottage, her stick tapping the path, the news was on every tongue. Harrow was dead, found stiff in his study at Willow Manor. Poison, they said. Suicide, the police thought. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes told her something else. She walked slowly toward the manor, her gray shawl snug around her shoulders. Her lace cap sat neatly on her white hair, and to anyone watching, she was just an old lady out for a stroll. But her mind was racing, picking up pieces from yesterday's tea party. Harrow's nervous hands, his talk of debts unpaid, and the quiet housemaid, Emily Clark, with her watchful stare. Something wasn't right, and Miss Marple never ignored a hunch. At the manor, a small crowd had gathered. The vicar, Mr. Clement, stood by the gate, his face pale. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, whispered loudly to Miss Hartnell, her red hat bobbing. A young policeman, Constable Reed, kept people back, his notebook open but his face confused. Inside the manor's iron gates, Inspector Craddock, a man Miss Marple knew well, was already at work. He was sharp, but he didn't always see what she did. Miss Marple slipped through the crowd, her small figure unnoticed. She stopped near the manor's front steps, where the gardener, Tom Bates, was talking to Mrs. Wicks. Tom's hands shook as he spoke. "I found him, Mrs.," he said, his voice low, slumped over his desk. He was glass tipped over, papers scattered. Horrible smell, like bitter almonds. Mrs. Wicks gasped, clutching her shawl. "Poison then. Oh, the poor man. To take his own life like that." Miss Marple's lips pressed thin. She didn't believe in poor man just yet. She caught Tom's eye and asked gently, "Was anything odd, Tom, besides the body? I mean, anything out of place?" Tom scratched his head, thinking, "Well, now you mention it, there was a teacup on the desk. Funny thing, that. Mr. Harrow always drank whiskey at night, not tea. And the cup had a smudge, like lipstick, but faint." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Lipstick, you say? Interesting." She thanked Tom and moved closer to the manor, where Inspector Craddock was stepping out. He saw her and tipped his hat, a mix of respect and amusement in his eyes. "Miss Marple," he said, "I might have known you'd be here, already sniffing out a mystery." She smiled, her face soft, but her eyes sharp. "Just taking the air, Inspector, but I hear it's poison. Cyanide, perhaps." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "You're quick." "Yes, the doctor thinks cyanide. Fast, deadly. Looks like suicide. Harrow was alone. Door locked from inside. No sign of a struggle." "Locked doors can be tricky," Miss Marple said mildly. "And a teacup with lipstick. That's curious for a man drinking alone." Craddock frowned. "Teacup. Nobody mentioned that." He jotted a note, then sighed. "You're right, though. It's odd. We'll look into it." Miss Marple nodded, saying nothing more. She didn't need to. Craddock would check the cup, and she'd keep watching. She turned her gaze to the manor, where Emily Clark stood in the doorway, her plain dress neat but her face pale, her hands twisted in her apron, and her eyes darted to the crowd, then away. To most, she looked like a scared girl, grieving her employer. To Miss Marple, she looked like someone carrying a weight. The village kept buzzing as Miss Marple walked back home. At the post office, she stopped to buy stamps, listening to the chatter. Mrs. Price was in her element, her voice loud. "Suicide, they say, but I don't believe it. That man had plans, big ones. Why end it now?" Miss Hartnell, her hat still red and loud, snorted. "Maybe he had debts. Rich men always do. Or enemies. He didn't look like a saint." Miss Marple bought her stamps and said nothing, but her mind filed away every word. Debts again. Harrow had mentioned them himself, and enemies. A man like that might have plenty. She thought of Emily, so quiet, so unseen. Servants saw everything, doors left open, letters read in secret. What had Emily seen? Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting in her lap. Cherry, her maid, burst in, her cheeks pink from running. "Miss Marple, it's awful. Mr. Harrow, dead. They're saying he drank poison, all alone." "But why?" Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "Why, indeed," she said. "Tell me, Cherry, what do you know about Emily Clark, the housemaid at the manor?" Cherry plopped into a chair, her eyes wide. "Emily, she's quiet as a mouse. Keeps to herself. I saw her at the market once, buying herbs. She didn't talk much, just paid and left. But she's got a funny look sometimes, like she's thinking hard." "Herbs, you say?" Miss Marple's voice was soft. "What kind?" Cherry shrugged. "Dunno, green stuff. Looked like parsley or something." Miss Marple's fingers paused. "Parsley or something like it. Some plants looked harmless but weren't. She'd read about poisons in her nephew's old chemistry books. Hemlock, for instance, could be mistaken for parsley. Not cyanide, but deadly all the same." She tucked the thought away. It was too early to jump to conclusions. But her mind was building a picture. That afternoon, she visited the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was pouring tea for a few neighbors. The talk was all about Harrow. "Such a shock," Mrs. Clement said, passing a cup to Miss Marple. He seemed so lively yesterday. But I suppose some men hide their troubles. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes thoughtful. Did he seem troubled to you, Mrs. Clement? At the party, perhaps. Mrs. Clement frowned, thinking, well, he did say something odd about settling debts. I thought he meant money, but his voice was so cold, it gave me chills. Miss Marple nodded. That word again, debts. She glanced out the window, where Willow Manor loomed in the distance. The police were still there, their cars parked crookedly. She wondered about the teacup, the lipstick smudge, a woman's touch in a man's death, Emily, or someone else. As she walked home, Miss Marple passed the manor's garden shed, half hidden by overgrown bushes. She paused, her stick resting on the path. Tom had mentioned seeing Emily near the shed before the murder. Why? To fetch tools, or something else? Miss Marple's eyes scanned the ground, spotting a faint footprint in the mud, a small shoe, like a woman's. She filed it away, her mind sharp as ever. At home, she sat by her window, knitting and thinking. The village was rattled, but she was calm. She'd seen death before murder, not suicide. The teacup, the lipstick, the footprint. Harrow's words, they were threads in a tapestry, and she'd weave them together. Emily Clark was part of it, she was sure. The girl was too quiet, too careful. But there was more to find Harrow's enemies, his secrets, his debts. As night fell, St. Mary Mead grew quiet. But Miss Marple's mind didn't rest. She thought of a case years ago, a quiet girl in the village who'd poisoned her cruel father. Everyone had called it suicide, but Miss Marple had seen the truth. A teacup, a glance, a hidden motive. History had a way of repeating itself, and she'd be ready when it did. Tomorrow, Harrow's family would arrive, his nephew, his sister, his cousin, more threads for her tapestry. She smiled faintly, her needles clicking. The puzzle was growing, and Miss Marple loved a good puzzle. Chapter 3. The family gathers. The sun climbed higher over St. Mary Mead, but a chill hung in the air. Willow Manor stood silent, its tall windows catching the light like cold eyes. Mr. Reginald Harrow's death had shaken the village, and now his family was arriving, drawn by whispers of money and secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, her knitting needles clicking, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She'd heard the cars rumbling up the lane, 3 of them, each bringing a new piece to her puzzle. By noon, the manor was busy again, not with police, but with Harrow's kin. Miss Marple decided to pay a call, her excuse a basket of apples for the grieving family. She wore her usual gray skirt and shawl, her lace cap neat on her white hair. To the world, she was just a kind old lady, but her mind was a net, catching every word, every look. At the manor, she was met by Emily Clark, the housemaid, who opened the door with a curt nod. Emily's face was pale, her brown hair tucked under a cap, her hands twisting in her apron. "There in the parlor, Miss Marple," she said, her voice soft but tight. Miss Marple smiled gently, noting the girl's quick glance toward the study where Harrow had died. "Thank you, Emily," Miss Marple said. "Such a sad time. You must be worn out, poor dear." Emily's eyes flickered, but she only nodded and led the way. Miss Marple followed, her stick tapping the polished floor. The parlor was grand, with heavy curtains and a crackling fire. 3 people sat there, their faces stiff with grief for something else. First was Charles Harrow, the nephew, a lean man in his 30s, with sharp eyes and a tight mouth. He stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, jingling coins. Next was Margaret Harrow, the sister, older and stern, her black dress stiff as her posture. She sat ramrod straight, her lips pressed thin. Last was Dr. Vernon, a distant cousin, a small man with round glasses and a nervous twitch. He was a chemist, Miss Marple recalled, which made her think of poisons. "Miss Marple, how kind," Margaret said, her voice cold but polite. "Apples, how thoughtful. Just a small gift," Miss Marple said, setting the basket down. "I was so sorry to hear about your brother. Such a shock." Charles snorted, turning from the window. "Shock, maybe. Uncle Reginald was always a mystery. Kept his cards close." Margaret shot him a look. "Charles, please, he was family." family he barely spoke to, Charles muttered, then caught himself, forcing a smile. Sorry, Miss Marple, it's been a rough day. Dr. Vernon cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. It's the suddenness. You see, cyanide, they say, so quick. I study chemicals, and it's a nasty one. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes soft but sharp. Cyanide, yes. I heard the police think suicide. But that teapot, wasn't it? With a smudge of lipstick. The room went still. Charles stopped jingling his coins. Margaret's teacup rattled on its saucer. Dr. Vernon blinked fast, his fingers twitching. Lipstick, he said. I hadn't heard. Oh, just village talk, Miss Marple said lightly. You know how it spreads. But a teacup in a man's study at night. Curious. Margaret set her cup down hard. Reginald drank whiskey, not tea. If there was a cup, someone else left it. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice mild. She glanced at Emily, who hovered by the door, polishing a silver tray. The girl's hands moved fast, too fast, and her eyes stayed on the floor. Miss Marple stayed a little longer, chatting about the weather and the village, but she watched. Charles paced, his eyes darting to a locked desk in the corner. Margaret gripped her handkerchief, her knuckles white. Dr. Vernon kept fussing with his glasses, muttering about family matters, and Emily, quiet as a shadow, slipped out to the kitchen, her steps quick, back home. Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting in her lap. Cherry, her maid, burst in, her cheeks pink. Miss Marple, I saw you at the manor. What's the family like? Are they as rich as Mr. Harrow was? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Rich in something, Cherry. Maybe money, maybe secrets. Tell me, have you seen Emily Clark today? Cherry nodded, sitting down at the market early. She was buying milk, but she looked scared, like she'd seen a ghost, kept looking over her shoulder. Scared, Miss Marple murmured. Oh, guilty. Her needles clicked, her mind turning. The teacup, the lipstick, Emily's nerves, Charles's pacing, Margaret's tension, Vernon's chemicals. They were pieces, but the picture wasn't clear yet. That afternoon, she walked to the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was hosting a small tea. The talk was all about Harrow's family. Miss Hartnell, her red hat bright, leaned close. That Charles is after the money. Mark my words. I saw him poking around the manor's study last night, through the window. Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. At night, alone. Miss Hartnell nodded. Sneaky, if you ask me. And that Margaret cheese, cold as ice. No tears for her brother. Mrs. Clement poured tea, her face worried. And Dr. Vernon, he's odd, always talking about his lab. Did you know he works with poisons? Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sharp. Vernon and poisons. Charles and the study. Margaret and her coldness. And Emily, always there, always watching. She thought of a girl in St. Mary Mead years ago, quiet like Emily, who'd hidden a secret so dark it led to murder. Was Emily hiding something too? As she left the vicarage, Miss Marple passed the manor's garden shed again. She paused, her eyes on the footprint she'd seen yesterday, small, like a woman's. She looked closer. Near the shed, half hidden by grass, was a tiny scrap of cloth, blue like Emily's apron. She picked it up with her stick, tucking it into her pocket. A clue maybe, or nothing. But Miss Marple never ignored the small things. At home, she sat by her window, the manor's lights faint in the distance. Her knitting needles moved steadily, but her mind was faster. The family was here, and with them came motives, money, grudges, secrets. Charles wanted the fortune. Margaret hid something behind her cold eyes. Vernon knew poisons too well. And Emily quiet. Scared Emily was no bystander. The village was still buzzing, but Miss Marple was calm. She'd seen this before. Greed and lies dressed up as grief. The teacup, the footprint, the cloth, Harrow's debts. They were threads, and she'd weave them together. Tomorrow, she'd dig deeper, maybe talk to Emily, or watch Charles at the study. The puzzle was growing, and Miss Marple was ready. Chapter 4. Whispers of a Wiltham morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead, wrapping Willow Manor in a soft, gray veil. The village hummed with talk of Mr. Reginald Harrow's death, but now the whispers had a new edged rumors of a hidden will. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy parlor, her knitting needles clicking like a quiet clock. Her sharp blue eyes gazed out the window, where the manor loomed, its secrets pulling her like a magnet. She'd heard the gossip at the post office. Harrow's fortune might not go to his family. If there was a will, it changed everything. Miss Marple tucked her shawl around her shoulders and picked up her stick. She'd visit the manor again, this time to see the family's faces. Greed, she knew, had a way of cracking masks. Her gray skirt swished as she walked, her lace cap neat on her white hair. To the village, she was just an old lady with a kind smile, but her mind was a trap, catching every glance, every word at Willow Manor. The air was thick with tension. Emily Clark, the housemaid, opened the door, her face paler than yesterday. Her brown hair was tucked under her cap, but a strand hung loose, and her hands shook as she took Miss Marple's coat. There in the dining room, Emily mumbled, her eyes on the floor, arguing. Miss Marple nodded, her smile gentle, but her eyes sharp. "Thank you, Emily. It must be hard. With all this upset." Emily's lips twitched, but she said nothing, slipping away to the kitchen. Miss Marple noted the girl's quick steps, the way her hands clutched her apron. Fear, guilt, or just nerves? She'd find out. In the dining room, Harrow's family sat around a long table, their voices sharp. Charles, the nephew, leaned forward, his lean face tight. "If there's a will, I'll find it," he said, his voice low but hard. "Uncle Reginald owed me years of promises, and now this." Margaret, the sister, sat stiffly, her black dress like armor. "Don't be a fool, Charles," she snapped. "If there's a will, it's locked away." Reginald was cunning. He'd never leave his money to you. Dr. Vernon, the chemist's cousin, fidgeted with his glasses, his small frame hunched. "Let's not fight," he said, his voice thin. "The police are still here. They'll want to know about everything." Miss Marple knocked softly and stepped in, her basket of homemade jam, a perfect excuse. "Just a small gift," she said, her voice sweet. "For such a sad time." Charles forced a smile, but his eyes stayed cold. "Kind of you, Miss Marple. We're just sorting things out." Margaret's lips thinned. "Sorting, indeed. My brother left a mess, as always." Miss Marple set the jam down, her eyes flicking to the desk in the corner. Papers were scattered, a drawer half open. "A will, I hear," she said lightly. "The village is full of talk. They say Mr. Harrow might have left his money elsewhere." Charles's hand froze on his coffee cup. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Dr. Vernon coughed, his glasses slipping. "Village gossip," Charles said too quickly. "No proof of a will." "Yet," Margaret added, her voice sharp, "but if there is one, it's mine by right. I'm his sister." Dr. Vernon shifted in his seat. Reginald wasn't sentimental. He might have given it to charity, or someone else. Miss Marple's smile stayed soft, but her mind raced. Charity, or someone like Emily, quiet and unseen. She thought of the teacup, the lipstick smudge, the footprint by the shed. Pieces, all of them, waiting to fit. She left the manor, but lingered near the garden, pretending to admire the roses. Through a window, she saw Charles slip into the study, his hands rifling through the desk. He pulled out papers, his face tight with frustration. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, looking for the will, or hiding something else. Back in the village, she stopped at the knitting circle, held in Mrs. Price's parlor. The women's needles clicked, but their tongues were faster. Miss Hartnell, her red hat bold as ever, leaned close. "They say Harrow hid a will," she whispered, "maybe in that old desk. Charles was seen there last night, poking around." Mrs. Wicks nodded, her eyes wide. "And that Emily Clark, I saw her by the Manors shed 2 days ago, before the murder. What was she doing there?" Miss Marple's needles paused. "The shed, you say? Interesting." She remembered the footprint, the scrap of blue cloth. "And Emily, how did she seem?" "Scared," Mrs. Wicks said, "like she was hiding something. Kept looking around, then ran back inside." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning. The shed, the will, Charles's sneaky search, Emily's ferret was a tangle, but she'd unravel it. She thought of a case years ago. A quiet maid in St. Mary Mead who'd hidden a stolen letter in a garden shed. Small places held big secrets. Dot at home. Cherry burst in, her cheeks pink. Miss Marple, the village is wild. They say Harrows will leaves everything to a stranger. Maybe Emily, even. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Stranger, indeed. Or someone close, but overlooked. Tell me, Cherry, has Emily been at the market lately? Cherry nodded. Yesterday, buying more herbs. Same as before, green stuff. Like parsley. She was jumpy, kept dropping coins. Parsley, Miss Marple murmured. Or hemlock, perhaps. Not cyanide, but another poison. Slower, subtler. She tucked the thought away. It was too soon to say. But Emily was a thread she couldn't ignore. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting steady. The village was buzzing, but she was calm. Charles's greed, Margaret's coldness, Vernon's nerves, Emily's herbs, they were clues, not answers. The will was key, but where was it and why a teacup with lipstick in a man's study? She thought of Harrow's words at the tea party. Debts unpaid. Debts to whom? The family, or someone like Emily, with a grudge older than her years. Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. The puzzle was growing, and she was close to a corner piece. Tomorrow, she'd watch Emily closer, maybe visit the shed. The truth was there, waiting, and Miss Marple always found the truth. Chapter 5. The village gossip. The sun peeked through the clouds over St. Mary Mead, casting dappled light on the village's cobblestone paths. Willow Manor stood quiet, but the village was anything but. Mr. Reginald Harrow's death had tongues wagging, and now talk of a hidden will fueled the fire. Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, her knitting needles clicking softly, her sharp blue eyes scanning the lane. She wore her usual gray shawl and lace cap, looking like any old lady, but her mind was a steel trap, catching every whisper, every glance. Today was the weekly knitting circle at Mrs. Price's parlor, a perfect place to hear the village's pulse. Miss Marple tucked her knitting into a basket and walked to the postmistress's cottage, her stick tapping the ground. The air smelled of fresh bread and roses, but beneath it was the tense of suspicion. Harrow's death wasn't just news, it was a puzzle, and Miss Marple was piecing it together at Mrs. Price's. The parlor was warm, with a fire crackling and teacups clinking. The women sat in a circle, their needles busy, their voices buzzing. Mrs. Price, her cheeks pink, leaned forward. They say Harrow's will is locked in that desk, she whispered. Charles was seen snooping again last night. Greedy, that one. Miss Hartnell, her red hat bright, nodded. Greedy, yes. But Margaret's worse, cold as stone. No tears for her brother. And that Dr. Vernon, always twitching. Chemists know poisons, don't they? Miss Marple sipped her tea, her face soft but her ears sharp. Poisons, indeed, she said lightly. But what about Emily Clark? The housemaid must see a lot, quiet as she is. Mrs. Wicks, clutching her knitting, leaned in. Emily, I saw her by the manor shed again, day before the murder. She was digging, I swear. Looked scared, kept checking over her shoulder. Miss Marple's needles paused. Digging, you say? How curious. She remembered the footprint by the shed, the scrap of blue cloth like Emily's apron. Digging could mean hiding evidence, perhaps, or something darker. Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, poured more tea. Poor Emily, she said. So young, so quiet, but I heard something odd. My cook said Emily's mother worked for a family in London years ago. They lost everything, something to do with Harrow's business deals. Ruined. She was. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Ruined. That's interesting. A motive, maybe. A girl like Emily, quiet and plain, could hold a grudge deep as a well. She thought of a case long ago, a shy maid who'd stolen to settle a score. Quiet ones were dangerous, she knew. The talk turned to the teacup, the lipstick smudge. No woman was in that study, Miss Hartnell said. Harrow was alone, locked in, unless... She trailed off, eyes wide. unless someone tricked him. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Tricks are common enough, she said. A teacup's out of place though. Makes you wonder. She left the knitting circle with her basket, her mind spinning. Emily's mother, ruined by Harrow. The shed, the footprint, the cloth. Charles's snooping, Margaret's coldness, Vernon's nerves, and that teacup, with its faint lipstick mark. Pieces, all of them, but the picture was blurry. Back home, Cherry burst in, her eyes bright. Miss Marple, the village is wild. They say Emily's mother died after Harrow cheated her family, and now Emily's working for him. That's no coincidence. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. No coincidence at all. Cherry, tell me, have you seen Emily today? Cherry plopped into a chair. At the bakery, this morning. She bought bread, but she was jumpy. Dropped her coins again. Kept looking at the manor, like she expected trouble. Trouble, Miss Marple murmured, or guilt. She thought of the herbs. Cherry mentioned parsley, or something like it. Hemlock, maybe, though cyanide was the killer. Could Emily have planned something else, then switched poisons? The teacup suggested a woman's hand, but whose? That afternoon, Miss Marple walked by the manor, her eyes on the garden shed. The door was ajar, and she glimpsed a shovel inside, its blade muddy. She didn't touch it. Inspector Craddock would need to see it first, but she noted the fresh dirt. Someone had been digging, and recently she passed Emily in the village, carrying a basket of laundry. The girl's face was pale, her eyes red, as if she'd been crying. Good day, Emily, Miss Marple said kindly. Such a hard time for you. Emily flinched, her hands tightening on the basket. Yes, Miss Marple, she mumbled. It's awful. She hurried off, her steps quick, almost running. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind sharp. Emily was scared, but of what? Being caught, or something else? She thought of the shed, the will, the teacup. Harrow's death wasn't simple, and the family wasn't telling all. Charles wanted money, Margaret hid pain, Vernon knew poisons, but Emily quiet. Invisible Emily was the key dot at home. Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting steady. The village buzzed, but she was calm. The gossip had given her threads of Emily's mother, the shed, the will. She'd tug them gently, see what unraveled. Tomorrow, she'd talk to Inspector Craddock, maybe mention the shovel. The puzzle was growing, and Miss Marple was close to a breakthrough. The truth was there, hiding, but she'd find it, stitch by stitch. Chapter 6. A clue in the teacup. The morning sun spilled over St. Mary Mead, glinting off the dewy grass. Willow Manor stood somber, its windows dark, as if guarding secrets. The village buzzed with talk of Mr. Reginald Harrow's death poison, a locked room, a missing will. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking softly, her sharp blue eyes tracing the lane to the manor. She wore her gray shawl and lace cap, looking like any old lady, but her mind was a blade, cutting through gossip to find truth. Today, she'd visit Inspector Craddock, share her thoughts about the teacup, that odd clue, with its faint lipstick smudge. It didn't fit a man's suicide, and Miss Marple didn't like things that didn't fit. She tucked her knitting into a basket and walked to the village hall, where the police had set up. Her stick tapped the path, her steps slow but sure. The hall. Inspector Craddock was sorting papers, his face tired but sharp. He saw Miss Marple and smiled, half amused, half respectful. Miss Marple, I should have known you'd come. Got another hunch. She smiled back, her eyes twinkling. Just a thought. Inspector, that teacup in Mr. Harrow's study, it's been on my mind. Lipstick, they say, and a trace of something else, perhaps. Craddock frowned, flipping through his notebook. The teacup, yes, we tested it. Cyanide, in the dregs, but also a sedative, something to make him sleepy. Odd for a man drinking alone. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. A sedative, how clever. Someone might have wanted him drowsy before the poison. To make it look like suicide. Craddock raised an eyebrow. You think murder? The door was locked, no signs of a struggle. Locked doors can be tricked, she said mildly. And a teacup with lipstick. That's a woman's touch, don't you think? Craddock jotted a note, his face serious. "We'll look again. The family's no help. Charles is greedy, cold. Dr. Vernon's jumpy. And that housemaid, Emily Clark, she's quiet. But I don't trust quiet." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A sedative and cyanide. 2 steps, planned carefully. She thought of Emily, pale, nervous Emily, with her herbs and her scared eyes. The shed, the footprint, the blue cloth, and now, a teacup with a sedative. The pieces were piling up. She left the hall and walked toward the manor, her eyes on the garden shed. The door was still ajar, the shovel inside gleaming with fresh dirt. She didn't touch it. She'd tell Craddock later, but she noted a faint smell, bitter and green, like crushed leaves, herbs, perhaps, or poison. In the village. She stopped at the bakery, where Cherry was buying rolls. Cherry's eyes lit. "UP, Miss Marple. They're saying the police found something in the teacup, not just poison, but something to make Harrow sleep. Is it murder?" Miss Marple's lips twitched. "The village is quick, Cherry. Tell me, have you seen Emily today?" Cherry nodded, her voice low. "At the market, early. She bought more herbs, green ones, like before. Looked like she hadn't slept, eyes all red. Kept muttering about debts being paid." "Debts," Miss Marple murmured. Harrow's words at the tea party echoed. Debts unpaid. Emily's mother, ruined by Harrow's deals, a motive as old as time. She thought of a case years ago. A quiet girl who'd slipped a sedative into her master's drink. Revenge for a family wrong. History loved to repeat. Back home, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting steady. She pictured the study, Harrow, at his desk, drowsy from a sedative, sipping tea laced with cyanide. The teacup, with its lipstick smudge, left behind. A woman's work, but whose Emily was the obvious choice, quiet, close to Harrow, with a reason to hate him. But Dr. Vernon, new chemicals, and Margaret's coldness hid something. Even Charles, greedy as he was, might have played a part. She thought of the shed, the shovel, the herbs, Emily digging, hiding something, maybe the poison's source. Hemlock, perhaps, mistaken for parsley, though cyanide was the killer. A backup plan, or a mistake. Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. The teacup was the key, but the shed held answers too. That afternoon, she walked by the manor again, pausing near the shed. Emily was there, sweeping the path, her movements quick, her eyes darting. "Good day, Emily," Miss Marple called, her voice kind. "Such a lovely garden." Despite everything, Emily jumped, her broom clattering. "Oh, Miss Marple. Yes, it's nice." Her voice shook, and she hurried inside, leaving the shed door open. Miss Marple peered in, her eyes catching a small glass vial, half buried in dirt. She didn't touch it. Craddock would need to see it, but her heart raced. A vial, like one for chemicals, or poison. At home, she sat by her window, the manor's lights faint in the dusk. The village was alive with talk, but she was calm. The teacup, the sedative, the vial, Emily's herbs, Harrow's debts. They were threads in a tapestry. She'd tug them soon, see what unraveled. Tomorrow, she'd tell Craddock about the vial, maybe ask about Emily's mother. The puzzle was close to cracking, and Miss Marple never missed a stitch. Chapter 7. The shocking twist. A morning light fell softly over St. Mary Mead, but a shadow hung over Willow Manor. The village buzzed with fresh gossip about Mr. Reginald Harrow's death, poison, a teacup, a hidden will. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting needles clicking, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the manor's distant outline. Her gray shawl was snug, her lace cap neat, making her look like any old lady. But her mind was a net, catching every clue: the teacup's sedative, the shed's vial, Emily Clark's nervous glances. Today, Miss Marple felt close to the truth. The pieces were falling into place, and a shocking twist was forming in her mind. She'd visit the manor again, watch Emily, and talk to Inspector Craddock about that vial. Her stick tapped the path as she walked, her basket swinging with a pretext of cookies for the family. At the manor, Emily opened the door, her face paler than ever. Her brown hair straggled from her cap, and her hands twisted in her apron. "Miss Marple," she mumbled, eyes on the floor. There, in the parlor. Thank you, Emily, Miss Marple said, her voice kind, but her eyes sharp. You look tired, dear. Such a strain. All this. Emily nodded, her lips tight, and scurried to the kitchen. Miss Marple noted the tremble in her hands, the quick look toward the garden. Fear or guilt? She'd soon know. In the parlor, the family was tense. Charles paced, his lean face hard. If that will's not found, we're ruined, he muttered. Margaret sat stiff, her black dress crisp, her eyes cold. Dr. Vernon fidgeted, his glasses slipping. Let's not panic, he said, voice thin. The police are still searching. Miss Marple set her cookies down, smiling. Just a small gift, she said. The village is full of Will, a vial in the shed. Such strange times. Charles froze, his eyes narrow. Vial? What vial? Margaret's cup rattled. Village nonsense, she snapped. Reginald was careless, that's all. Dr. Vernon coughed, his hands twitching. A vial could be anything. Medicine, maybe. Miss Marple's smile stayed soft, but her mind raced. They knew something or feared it. She left the parlor but lingered near the study, where Inspector Craddock was examining papers. Miss Marple, he said, nodding, found something. That vial in the shed, she said quietly. Have you seen it? Glass, buried in dirt, near where Emily was digging. Craddock's eyes sharpened. Digging, nobody told me. I'll check it now. Miss Marple nodded, her heart quickening. She walked to the garden, pretending to admire the roses. The shed door was open, and she saw the vial again, glinting in the dirt. Nearby, a patch of ground looked freshly turned. She thought of Emily's herbs, parsley, or hemlock. And the teacups, sedative. A plan was forming, dark and clever. Back, in the village, she stopped at the post office. Mrs. Price leaned over the counter, eyes wide. They say Emily's mother was ruined by Harrow, she whispered. Lost everything, her home, her husband. Died of a broken heart. Emily was just a girl then. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A broken heart, she murmured. Or a reason for revenge. She thought of a case years ago, a quiet girl who'd poisoned a cruel master. Emily fit the pattern, meek, unseen, but burning inside. At home. Cherry burst in, cheeks pink. Miss Marple, I heard something. Emily was seen near the shed again, last night, and she was crying at the market, talking about making things right. Making things right, Miss Marple repeated. The teacup, the sedative, the cyanide, the violet clicked. Emily had planned it all. The sedative to drowsy Harrow, the cyanide to kill him, the teacup to stage a suicide, the lipstick, a mistake or a taunt, and the vial in the shed, proof of her crime. Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting steady. She saw it now. Emily's mother, ruined by Harrow's shady deals, dead by her own hand. Emily, young and grieving, growing up with hate. She'd taken the housemaid job to get close, waited for her moment. The shed hid her tools, herbs, vials, poison. The meek girl was a mask, hiding a cunning mind. The twist was shocking, but it fit. Emily wasn't just a servant. She was the killer. Miss Marple's needles paused. She'd need proof, something to make Emily slip. The vial was key, but so was the will. If it named Emily, or cut out the family, it would explain everything. She thought of Harrow's words. Debts unpaid. He'd known someone hated him. Had he suspected Emily? Or was his debt to her mother unpaid until death? Miss Marple's mind spun, threading clues. The footprint, the cloth, the herbs, the teacup. Emily was the sinner, but the family wasn't clean. Charles's greed, Margaret's secrets, Vernon's chemicals, they muddied the water. Tomorrow, she'd set a trap, nudge Emily to act. She'd tell Craddock about the vial, suggest a search. The village was buzzing, but Miss Marple was calm. The truth was close, and she'd pull it into the light, stitch by stitch. Chapter 8. Miss Marple's Trap. The dawn broke gently over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in pale pinks and golds. Willow Manor loomed quiet, its secrets heavy in the air. The village buzzed with talk of Mr. Reginald Harrow's death poison, a teacup, a hidden will, and now a vial in the shed. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlor window, her knitting needles clicking, her sharp blue eyes on the manor. Her gray shawl was snug, her lace cap neat, but her mind was a hunter, closing in on the truth. Emily Clark, the meek housemaid, was the killer. She was sure now. But proof was needed, and Miss Marple knew how to get it. She'd set a trap today, something to make Emily slip. The vial in the shed, the teacups, sedative, the lipstick smudge, they pointed to a clever plan. Emily's motive, her mother's ruin by Harold's hands, burned deep. Miss Marple tucked her knitting away and grabbed her stick, her basket, filled with scones, as a pretext. She'd visit the manor, nudge the truth into the open dot. At Willow Manor, Emily opened the door, her face white as chalk. Her brown hair straggled under her cap, her hands twisting in her apron. "Miss Marple," she mumbled, eyes darting to the garden. "The family's in the dining room." "Thank you, Emily," Miss Marple said, her voice soft, but her eyes sharp. "You look troubled, dear. So much to bear." Emily's lips quivered, but she nodded and scurried off. Miss Marple watched her go, noting the quick glance toward the shed. Guilty, she thought, but scared. To Dot in the dining room, the family was tense. Charles, the nephew, gripped a coffee cup, his lean face tight. "The police are sniffing around. Again," he muttered. "That vial in the shed, what's it mean?" Margaret, the sister, sat stiff, her black dress like a shield. "Nonsense," she snapped. "Reginald brought this on himself. No will, no answers." Dr. Vernon, the chemist cousin, fidgeted with his glasses. "A vial could be anything," he said, voice shaky. "Not necessarily. Poison." Miss Marple set her scones down, smiling. "Such a sad time," she said. "The village is talking. You know, they say someone saw a figure by the shed the night before Mr. Harrow died. Digging, perhaps." The room went still. Charles's cup clinked hard on the table. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Vernon's glasses slipped. Emily, hovering by the door, with a tray, froze, her hands shaking. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. The trap was set. She left the manor, but lingered near the garden, pretending to admire the roses. Through a window, she saw Emily slip out, heading for the shed. Miss Marple followed quietly, her stick silent on the grass. Emily reached the shed, glanced around, and knelt by the dirt patch. She dug frantically, pulling out the glass vial. Miss Marple had seen her hand shook as she stuffed it in her apron. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle, looking for something. "Emily." Emily gasped, dropping the vial. It rolled, glinting in the sun. I was just cleaning," she stammered, her face red. "Of course," Miss Marple said, her eyes kind but piercing. "But that violet's important, isn't it?" Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she bolted toward the manor. Miss Marple didn't follow. She'd seen enough. She walked to the village hall, where Inspector Craddock was reviewing notes. "Inspector," she said, "you'll want to check the manor shed. A vial, buried in dirt." Emily was just there. Craddock's eyes widened. "You're sure?" "I'll get it now." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Back home, she sat by her fire, her knitting steady. Cherry burst in, eyes bright. "Miss Marple, the police are at the manor. They found the vial cyanide. They think Emily's in a state, crying to the—" "Inspector," Miss Marple's needles paused. "Crying, is she? Tell me, Cherry, what did she say?" Cherry leaned close. She kept saying, "I had to make it right. Something about her mother, and Harrow ruining her." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. The trap had worked. Emily's panic, the vial, her words, it was enough. She saw it all. Emily, driven by her mother's death, slipping a sedative into Harrow's tea, then cyanide. The teacup, left with a lipstick smudge, was her mistake. The vial in the shed was her secret, hidden until now. She thought of her words, debts unpaid. He'd wronged Emily's mother, and Emily had settled the score. The family, Charles, Margaret, Vernon, had their own secrets, but Emily was the hand behind the poison. Miss Marple's trap had cracked her mask. Tomorrow, Craddock would question Emily, and she'd confess. The will, if found, might name a charity, tying up the village's loose ends. Miss Marple's needles clicked again. The puzzle was nearly done, and she'd stitched it tight. The truth was out, waiting for the final reveal. Chapter 9. A satisfying in-the-morning sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a warm glow, softening the edges of Willow Manor's grim shadow. The village hummed with whispers of Mr. Reginald Harrow's death, poison, a teacup, a vial, and now a confession. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlor window, her knitting needles clicking steadily, her sharp blue eyes calm but bright. Her gray shawl was snug, her lace cap neat, making her look like any old lady, but her mind had unraveled the puzzle. Emily Clark, the quiet housemaid, was the killer, and today, the truth would settle over the village like dust after a storm. Miss Marple had set her trap yesterday, and it worked. Emily's panic at the shed, clutching that cyanide vial, had led her straight to Inspector Craddock. Now, Miss Marple walked to the village hall, her stick tapping the path, her basket empty but her heart full of certainty. The manor's secrets were about to spill at the hall. Craddock met her, his face tired but relieved. "Miss Marple, you were right," he said. "Emily confessed. Broke down last night, told us everything." Miss Marple nodded, her smile soft. "Poor girl." "What did she say?" Craddock leaned back, his notebook open. "Her mother worked for a family in London, years ago. Harrow's shady deals ruined them, lost their home, their savings. Emily's mother took her own life. Emily was just a child, but she never forgot. When she saw Harrow move here, she took the housemaid job to get close, planned it all sedative in his tea. Cyanide after the teacup was her slip, left behind with her lipstick." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "And the vial in the shed. Cyanide. Hidden there," Craddock said. "She dug it up to destroy it, but you spooked her. Your talk of a witness by the shed pushed her to act." Miss Marple's needles would have clicked if she'd had them. Her trap-spreading word of a witness had worked perfectly. She thought of the teacup's lipstick smudge, the footprint, the blue cloth, Emily's herbs, all threads, now woven tight. "And the will?" she asked. Craddock grinned. "Found it this morning, locked in Harrow's desk. Leaves his fortune to a village charity for orphans. Nothing for the family. Charles is furious, Margaret's silent, Vernon's just nervous." Miss Marple's lips curved. A charity, it fit. Harrow's debts unpaid weren't to his kin but to the village. A final act to right his wrongs. Emily's revenge had closed one debt, but the will opened another. She walked to the manor, where the family was packing. Charles stormed out, muttering about lawyers. Margaret sat stiff, her face a mask. Dr. Vernon fidgeted, avoiding her eyes. Emily was gone, taken by the police, her quiet mask shattered. Miss Marple stood by the roses, her stick resting on the path. The shed door was shut, its secrets out. Back in the village, the knitting circle was alive with talk. Mrs. Price leaned forward, eyes wide. "Emily, a killer, who'd have thought? So quiet, so plain." Miss Hartnell, her red hat bobbing, snorted. "Quiet ones are the worst. But the charity, that's justice. Harrow's money, helping orphans, not his greedy nephew." Mrs. Clement poured tea, her voice soft. "Poor Emily. Such pain, to do such a thing." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind calm. "Pain makes people do dark things," she said. "But the truth always comes out. At home." Cherry burst in, cheeks pink. "Miss Marple, it's over. Emily's confessed. The will's found. The village is safe again." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. "Safe, yes, until the next puzzle." She sat by her fire, knitting, a scarf. The manor's lights dim in the distance. The village was settling, the buzz fading. Emily's confession brought justice, but also pity. Her mother's ruin had shaped her crime. The will gave the village hope, a gift from a flawed man. Charles, Margaret, and Vernon would leave, their secrets lighter, but their pockets empty. But Miss Marple thought of a case years ago. A quiet girl who'd righted a wrong with poison. History echoed, but St. Mary Mead moved on. The puzzle was solved, the threads tied. She leaned back, her knitting steady, her eyes on the quiet village. Another mystery done, and Miss Marple was ready for the next, whenever it came.